Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Wennerberg, and this is a conversation with Sean Goedecke. Sean is a staff engineer at GitHub, and we had an exchange of blog posts about cynicism in big tech. Essentially, what does it mean to be cynical? How do big tech companies operate? And how do we, as workers, navigate those institutions? And how should we navigate those institutions? So I appreciate Sean for joining me for this conversation, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi all, my name's Sean. I'm a staff engineer at GitHub, and I write a blog that was fairly popular in 2025.
So my name is Alex. I write a blog that is not popular in 2025, but Sean was very charitable and read it, and I thought gave a very interesting response. Sean wrote this article called "The Software Engineers Should Be a Little Bit Cynical." So why don't you just sort of summarize your ideas in this article, and then I'll have a few questions.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give a little context of my own. I've been writing blog posts about organizational politics since before 2025. Actually, that was what kind of kicked off my good year on the blog. Was a post that was largely about politics that got kind of quite popular and encouraged me to keep writing. And then in late 2025, I noticed that I was starting to get comments like, I like Sean's blog post and I think he's broadly right about this stuff, but it makes me very sad to read it. It's a very kind of depressing, cynical position. And it made me feel really weird to get those comments because I don't internally feel very cynical or sad when I write those posts, and I don't feel very cynical or sad about working in big tech, despite the things that are obviously imperfect or problematic about it. So I started to think, in what sense is a kind of overtly political attitude towards your work cynical, and to what sense is it kind of hopeful and idealistic? I certainly feel more hopeful, but possibly that's concealing a deeper cynicism. So I wrote this blog post called it's important for software engineers to be a little bit cynical or something like that. And the idea in it was basically that lots of ways to be cynical and idealistic in tech, and that people can either in two very broad categories. They can be cynical about their workplace, or they can be or they can be cynical about their own role in the workplace. So they can believe that tech is a pretty grinding, unpleasant, soul-destroying type of job to have, but it's important to stay strong and pure and do good software engineering work. Or they can believe that tech is not so bad and everyone's kind of trying to do the right thing, but they have to make compromises and they have to do things kind of internally that feel a little bit cynical in order to succeed. And I don't think I'm super. I mean, I have my position on those things, but I don't think it's silly to take the first stance. My goal in the blog post was less to argue that you shouldn't be cynical, or that you should be cynical about tech, and more just to say that the non-cynical position is a bit more cynical than you might think, and the cynical position is a bit more idealistic than you might think. So there's kind of room for a synthesis there.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you said is the project of your blog is to speak honestly and accurately about how big tech companies function. And I think a lot of your writing does that. And I think that people maybe interpret that sort of as cynical. And I think that I share the goal of trying to understand the tech industry accurately. I'm not trying to be particularly moralistic. I'm not trying to be particularly ideological, but I do want to sort of accurately understand the dynamic of how these companies function. And I want to read a quote that you had in your article. So this is your sort of characterization of maybe my position, or maybe the position of someone like Cory Doctorow is kind of what I was thinking here. So this is you stating a position you don't agree with. We live in a late stage capitalist hellscape where large companies are run by aspiring robber barons who have no serious convictions beyond desiring power. All those companies want is for obedient engineering drones to churn out bad code fast so they can goose the largely fictional stock price. Meanwhile, end users are left holding the bag, paying more for worse software, being hassled by advertisements, and dealing with bugs that are unprofitable to fix. The only thing an ethical engineer can do is try to find some temporary niche where they can defy their bosses and do real good engineering work, or to retire to a hobby farm and write elegant open source software in their free time. So in your view, what is incorrect about that statement?
What is incorrect about that statement? I think that statement is largely an exaggeration. I don't think there's any part of like there's no part of that that's just like flatly wrong. I mean, the people in charge of tech companies are pretty self-interested. There is pressure to churn out bad code, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's kind of just a pessimistic description of what it's like to be labor in a capitalist world where labor is subordinate to capital. Um, so the reason that's not my position is less that it's like flatly wrong, and more that just I think it's a bit uncharitable. I mean, there's plenty of people in the enterprise trying to do good. It's very unclear to me that software has gotten worse. I mean, the amount of people that use software like today compared to like 30 years ago is just so much higher. They use so much like a greater variety of software. It largely works. I don't know, like from what I remember of the 90s, like software did not largely work. It does largely work now. I mean, so I think there's a sense in which that quote is kind of focusing on the negatives in a way that's like very convincing if you're like a dissatisfied software engineer in the middle of it all trying to make it work, but is not like the most accurate way to view things.
So I'm very interested in this idea because I think that on some level I agree with what you're saying, in that like I don't necessarily agree 100% with that statement. I think that the truth is sort of in the middle, and I think that the reality is that most tech companies have both a positive effect on the world and a positive capacity to build good software, and sort of a negative effect on the world and a negative capacity to build good software. I think that let me find this quote that you have here. It's idealistic only in the sense that it does not accept the need for individual software engineers to compromise. According to this view, you never need to write bad software. No matter how hard the company tells you to compromise and just get something out, you're morally required to plant your feet and tell them to go to hell. In fact, by doing so, you're taking a stand against the general degradation of software in the modern world. So I think that I agree that there's sort of like there's an extreme idealism. So you mix this sort of idea of cynicism and idealism, but there's sort of an extreme version of this where you're just this radical anarchist sort of screw the companies, screw everyone. Like I don't care about anything except for whatever my personal engineering goals are, and I'm going to sort of make the company do whatever I think is, whether it's Postgres adoption or sort of some Rust or what fit to my ideological goals. But I think what I maybe struggle to understand in your piece, in your writing, is and this is something I brought out in my post, which is this idea of shareholder primacy. And so you wrote a post about, I think it was called "I am passionate about delivering shareholder value." And let me see if I can
I love that title. I still love
I know
that
it's
title.
very provocative. It's let me see if I can find. I have too many pages, so I'm like not very organized. So this is from a different blog post that you wrote, which is about becoming a staff engineer, I believe. And you say providing value to a company is what's rewarded, and not providing value to the company is what punishes you. And that the definition of value to the company means furthering the explicit plans of your company's executives. And I think if I understand the plans of the executives are identical with improving shareholder value. Is that correct in your characterization?
They're certainly aligned. Definitely, if they were identical, all executives would be successful, I think. But in theory, they're in the same direction. Yeah.
I think that like maybe the sort of idea that I want to float, and this is sort of what I spend probably the second half of my blog post writing about, is that like this is not the only way to run a firm. And so prior to, at least in my interpretation of history, prior to neoliberalism in the 1970s and 1980s, this idea of shareholder primacy was not how most firms were run. They had what is called like a stakeholder model, where yes, like the owner, the shareholder has some value, but our customers are also part of our value, and our employees are also part of our value, and our contribution to the world, and our product, and our mission. And there's this idea that the conception of a firm, profit is a component of it, but that the idea that profit is entirely the goal of a firm, to me, is maybe dominant in how big tech companies are run, but I don't think it's like the only way that any organization is run. Is that sort of, you understand what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I want to be clear here that like the project of my blog is a descriptive project, not a
Mm-hmm.
normative project. Or to the extent that it's a normative project, it's not in telling people how tech companies ought to run. It's in telling engineers how they ought to behave in relation to tech companies, which is basically don't stand up and try to stop the glacier with your bare hands. Like either jump off the glacier or like go with it. So this, yeah, I'm sympathetic to this idea that like, this might not be the best way to run a business, like, or it's not certainly not the only way to run a business. There might be a better world out there where like, this idea of like your fiduciary duty to shareholders dominating everything else doesn't actually apply. I mean, that sounds great to me, but like, if you're working at a company that isn't like that, you owe it to yourself to be clear-eyed about that. And you're going to run into a world of trouble if you go in thinking you're in like one of these possibly mythical pre 1970s kind of like warm-hearted companies, but in fact you're at Meta or you're at Microsoft or you're at Google. You will be kind of walking face first into the wood chipper.
I think that's very interesting. I think that I think what I want to understand, because I think I do, broadly speaking, like read your blog like that. I think that a lot of the reaction that you get that is maybe critical is people misreading it as a normative statement. But what I kind of want to understand is like the way in which normative statements kind of leak into what you're saying. I want to give a few quotes here. You say, the people who run large tech companies really do want to deliver good software to users. I mean, is that a descriptive statement or is that a normative statement?
I mean, I think that's a descriptive statement. It's not a claim about what they should want. It's not a claim about it's a claim about like it's a claim about their internal motivations. Basically, it's a claim about like what is their incentive structure. And what I'm saying is like, contra the most cynical position, their incentive structure is not in fact to deliver customers crap. It's to deliver customers good software, because good software makes more money and is more robust. Now, it is obviously true that they will trade off good software in order to achieve other goals. Good software is definitely not the primary goal, but it is a goal. It's just a goal that they might sacrifice in order to, build what they see as the right thing or to get time to market. But, all things being equal, like they absolutely want good software. They prioritize good software. They put in a lot of effort trying to make sure that what they produce is good software. It's just that they're very rarely willing to like trade it off for time or trade it off for other things.
Okay, so I think what I want to engage with is the descriptive aspect of what you're saying here.
Yep.
And I think there's two things that I want to get to. So the first is, I think we'll separate this out. But the first is that, like, the descriptive statement is that tech companies, broadly speaking, are run well, in the sense that their management is delivering on the terms of their own company shareholder value. So, and then the second statement is that tech companies delivering good software leads to is the basis of their share price, right? Of economic value. And so I want to talk a little bit about the second one. So I referenced Cory Doctorow. Have you read any Cory Doctorow or generally familiar with his project?
Yeah, I know the guy.
Sure.
Not
So
personally, but I know his work.
so I want to give you sort of an alternative story and get a sense of and you sort of sketch this out in your position. So I saw Cory Doctorow speak. It was very interesting, and I think that there's two components. Cory Doctorow and people in this space of people who are very critical of tech, they would argue that the primary way that big tech maintains shareholder value is through monopolistic practices. And so the story of what we call enshittification, as Cory Doctorow would say, is that you have some product, you at the beginning, you are aligned. So like expanding, giving users things that they want is aligned with expanding your company to the point at which you establish market dominance, at which point the relationship inverts. And that the best way for large tech companies to get the most money is an exploitative relationship with their users in which they degrade service, they lock in people to the platform, and have this antagonistic relationship. Now, I mean, there's a lot of examples of this. I don't have to name every big tech company, but I think it's a dynamic that seems like it does exist within the tech industry. Like it's not one that is not existent at all. And so I guess is your position that is not the case, or that there's something it's more nuanced or it's more limited than how he might characterize it?
Well, I think it's a weird position to hear when you've been working inside a big tech company, and you would have the same experience
Sure.
at Twitch, I imagine, which is that when I'll use an example of a company I haven't worked at to avoid it sounding like I'm giving details that I'm not giving. But
Sorry.
when, say, like Twitch achieved like dominance, and became the kind of primary streaming platform, Twitch didn't react to that by like downsizing and firing all of its expensive engineer cost centers, and instead just focusing on like milking its existing user base.
Well, I mean, that is what happened empirically.
Well,
I mean, there were large layoffs, right? There were
right, but
significant layoffs.
those layoffs came like a decade after Twitch was successful, at least 5 years after Twitch was successful. Those I don't think those layoffs were because Twitch was doing well. Those layoffs were with
I see what you're saying.
in lockstep with the layoffs across the entire market. Like we can take a different example then, say like Google, right? Like obviously Google didn't lay off after it became successful. It reacted to success by hiring more, by building more software, by trying to do more things, right? I think this model of like reacting to success via like shutting down costs and just trying to like suck out value from existing locked-in users definitely exists. I recently reread Robert Jacold's Moral Mazes, where he has a really great description of that dynamic in factories, where like factory managers are all incentivized to put off maintenance for as long as possible, and just to kind of hope that the factory doesn't blow up during their tenure, at the expense of the people who actually use the products produced. That model definitely exists, and but it doesn't exist in tech. Tech doesn't do that, right? Tech reacts to success by like trying to gain more ground and do more things and hire more engineers and build more software. Now, it is true that a successful product does get exploited. That part is true. Like, once a product gets successful, a company might, put ads in it, for instance. They might try and like lower costs by doing things. But I don't think that's, to the user, it might be the same thing. But I think internally that's not the company kind of, cutting its losses and trying to milk existing users. That's just trying to get on a more sustainable footing. I mean,
is that not the same thing? Could those not both be the case? In that what and I think like if you ask sort of, I was reading some of these like anti-monopoly, right, like Tim Wu or Lena Khan, who were basically, the idea is, and I think I read this in Peter Thiel 0 to 1. I didn't read it, but I like read about it. That the idea is like the fundamental business model is that you establish a monopoly, and so the whole structure of the company is based on the idea that you reach a certain monopolistic point, at which point you have the ability to do that. And so maybe another way of saying what you're saying is like, it seems that the Cory Doctorow story is kind of baked in. It's not that it's it is intentional, right? That it is baked into the model of how a lot of big tech companies operate. Is that incorrect or
What would the other story look like?
mm,
Would it look something like this? When a company is trying to gain users, it it's pulling out all the stops in order to make the best product it can. It's spending $1 billion a year in engineering salaries and who knows how much in infra, trying to make the product really, really good and attract users. It's running at an incredible loss. Once the product is successful, then the company has to find a way to make that become profitable and downsizing, like lowering costs in some way. Is the non-enshittification world a world where the company just doesn't do that and just continues to effectively subsidize products that can never be profitable? I'm thinking about like obviously in the AI space now, like companies are offering products for well under cost. It's kind of a race to the bottom on cost because you have so many kind of competitors running neck and neck. Is it enshittification to like for those prices to eventually go up to reflect the actual cost of providing the service? I mean, it seems to me like it's enshittification is a really negative way of looking at it. It's like, wow,
mm,
you get this period where like, Ubers cost $2 and everything is like VC, like saturated with VC money, and that's really good for the consumer in like the short term. It's like, oh, but the product's going to get worse later on. It's like, yeah, sure, but you had this period where like it was massively subsidized for like consumers and they got benefits they would never otherwise have been able to get. Like, I, I don't know. Like, I think maybe I have a more optimistic perspective on that.
see, this is where
It also helps
the
just
normative
incidentally.
position seems to be sneaking in here. Is kind of what I'm getting at. But I think that
Well, there's no hard distinction between the descriptive and the normative
of
elements.
course,
They
right.
the categories do bleed into each other.
But I think that if I'm going to make this position, which I think is maybe similar to my position, um, I'll just, this is my summary of Cory Doctorow because I think it's worth considering here, right? Is his position is that we used to live in a world in which there was a robust antitrust. And so establishing a monopoly was just not something that was really feasible for a company because the FTC is going to say, all right, we're going to slice and dice you. Like you can't behave a certain way. You can't do anti-competitive behavior. You can't monopolize a sector or else you're going to get broken up. And it seems to me that Cory Doctorow's position is that the regulatory environment changed. And so therefore it became a legitimate business strategy to pursue a monopoly in a sector and to pursue a kind of, to pursue this model in which you articulate where so I guess your question is like what's the alternative. So in my view the alternative would be a competitive market, right? And so a market in which certain things that large tech companies do which are anti-consumer or they are able to do because they have a market position. And so Microsoft can do all sorts of things. They have such a dominant position that they can maybe degrade their product and it actually benefits their stock price. Google could do all sorts of things, degrade their product, and it benefits their stock price. Now, if degrading their product led to regulatory intervention, it would not work, right? And so it seems to me that not to be overly political, but at least Cory Doctorow's position is we need to change the regulatory environment so that the interests of consumers, the interests of society are aligned with the profit-seeking behavior of large tech companies. And to get sort of to the descriptive, I know I'm being a little normative here, but I want to get to the descriptive is that like factually speaking, because big tech companies are broadly speaking monopoly-seeking organizations, there is a gap between benefiting the users and making money.
There is a gap between benefiting the users and making money, but is it because tech companies are monopoly-seeking organizations, or is it because benefiting the user costs money? Like, I'm not disagreeing with you about the about antitrust. We're getting somewhat far afield from my area of expertise. Like I can
Sure,
talk
sure.
about it, but it's just not something I know a ton about. I'd be kind of speculating, but it seems like it would be strange to me to call like my current company like GitHub a monopoly. In what sense is GitHub engaged in monopolistic behavior? In what sense has GitHub cornered the source control market via monopolistic means? I mean,
Well, I think this
there
is
are plenty
what's
of competitors. It's trivial to spin up like a GitHub competitor. People do it in a weekend.
yeah. I mean, I think I can't speak too much to GitHub specifically, but I think it's true
On
that
it, can I?
they have market dominance, right? They have
Yeah.
90, 95, 99%. And so one position would be market dominance is different than the monopoly behavior. And another would be that market dominance is monopoly. And so I think that there's a blurred line there, right? I think, Google is a good example. Google has such a dominance on search. And this is again an example that Cory Doctorow says is that they can internally say that actually maybe we can get better traffic if we make our search results worse, and so people have to scroll more and see more ads before they see their view. Now if Google had a meaningful competitor, you would say Google's really bad now, I'm going to start using Yahoo or whatever. And I think that story is complex, but I don't want to I think like you said, I don't want to get too far afield. But what I think I want to understand is uh, sort of so I think the reason I bring all this stuff up, right, is like I think it is the case that broadly speaking in any organization there's a gap between four things. And it's what's best for me, the individual, the employee, what my management chain wants, what's best for the company, and what's best for users or what's best for society. And it seems to me that in your writing, those things often get merged. And it seems to be that what's best for you is to do what your management chain wants, which is best for the company, which is best for the shareholders, broadly speaking. Is that correct, or am I misinterpreting your position here?
No, I think it's broadly correct. To the extent that it's a misinterpretation via overstatement, not by saying something totally wrong. So like I think it's more that, those four things in my mind are closer together than people think they are. But I don't believe they're identical. The the way I put it is I think like it's really common for engineers, and I don't really understand why. It's really common for engineers to believe that the executive company, like that the executive branch of their company is run by morons. And I don't know why that should be, because like engineers have no idea what it's like to be an executive at a massive tech company. It it seems very, very difficult. It seems like you're balancing a lot of different considerations, like steering any huge organization, whether it's a company or it's a government or it's a club, like is difficult, right? And it's at least like charitable to me to think that my VPs and directors and C staff are like doing the best they can, and are kind of broadly speaking trying to like steer the ship in the right direction. And it's again charitable to believe that the ship is kind of all one thing here. I mean, maybe that's wrong. I don't know. I mean, part of it as well is like if you're an individual engineer, like you can either choose to believe that like you're at a healthy company where everything is kind of aligned, or you can choose to believe that you're at a super unhealthy company where everything is really misaligned and everything you're doing is like for evil. Uh,
I guess so
it's
that's
sort of
that's
hard to know from
interesting,
the
right?
inside how you,
Is
yeah.
it so I think first off I think I agree, like I don't think that like the leaders of tech companies are morons. I don't think they're broadly speaking incompetent. It doesn't mean I'm not critical of a lot of the things that they do or the decisions that they make, but I don't think they're just like uniquely incompetent, right, among human beings. Um, but what you said, oh shoot, now I lost my train of thought. What was the last thing you said? Sorry.
I was saying that as an individual engineer, you can
Oh, you
choose
can
to,
choose to believe this. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So I guess like maybe like I view it slightly differently in that like uh one of those things is correct, right? So it's not that I choose to believe whether it could be the case. I mean, like it's if I worked at Enron in the late 1990s, it's not that I choose to believe whether Enron is like broadly speaking a well-run ethical company or not. It's clearly not, and that's an objective fact. I mean, well, as
Well,
much as
there,
objective facts exist, like that
there
was
is a
true,
fact of the
right?
matter, but as an individual engineer, you just don't know what that fact is. So in a
Mm.
sense, you're choosing to be optimistic or pessimistic about it. I mean, it is true that a company is to a certain extent well run, but you just have no visibility into that. Even as an insider, you have no visibility into that. You have no idea what the problems that the C-suite are even facing are. Like it's so opaque, and the message you're getting, like the literal message you're getting from above, or at least the message I've gotten every single team I've ever worked in is, you need to build good software. We have this project that we need to ship, and we really want users to like it. We really want it to be usable. We really want it to be polished and free of bugs. Like that's the message I've gotten over and over and over. So like, you know,
So
it
messaging
really
is
does seem like my job is to build software that people that that users like.
so. I think I want to break out a couple of things. There's maybe there's a difference between intention and action, right? So it might be the case that that's the intention of the executive team, but that they are um, not doing so, and not just not doing so because they're like personally incompetent, but because like the nature of the system or the nature of the organization stymies their ability to do so. And so, one of the reasons I bring up monopoly is it's like I'm sure that an executive who says I don't think we should incentivify our product because that's bad for users, even if it makes us more money. Like I just don't think they would, or even if it makes us less money, like they broadly speaking wouldn't come to that conclusion because that's, like you said, in an organization that's run by shareholder primacy, that's not really a decision that they're capable of making. Does it make sense?
Look, it does make sense, but if you're a software engineer, right, like you you can tell when a product's being deliberately enshittened in that sense, right? Because you're being told to build things like, let's add three more ads to the page, or let's degrade the quality 30% in order to save costs, right? You're building the things that are deliberately trading off against user experience, right? Like I don't really think you can be a software engineer in the process of enshittifying a product and have no idea that you're engaged in that pursuit because you're the one who has to actually write the code that does the thing. I mean, maybe there are cases where it's not clear to the implementer, but in all of the obvious cases, it seems really clear to the engineer that that's what they're engaged in because they're doing the thing. Um, and so like while I accept that this does happen, it just doesn't seem to have ever happened to me, or have not ever, but very rarely have happened to me. I mean, the projects I work on, we're typically trying to make the thing better. I mean, there are definitely cases I can think of where we've traded off user experience for cost and stuff, but it's not what I would describe the primary pursuit. The primary pursuit is to like build new things that make the user experience better. So this idea that like, you know, I think maybe what we're arguing about here is like whether the software company motivations is like dominated by enshittification or whether it's simply like
Well,
one trend among many, because I don't disagree that it exists. I just don't think it's the primary thread.
let me put it this way. I think that a lot of what you describe is the um, and you reference this a few times. You write these blog posts where it's like your job is to deliver shareholder value, and it
Yeah.
just seems to me that like sometimes shareholder value is aligned with making a good product. Sometimes it's not aligned with making a good product. And
So
if you have
I
yeah
want
yeah
to
yeah
I want
yeah
to cut in there,
yeah
sorry,
yeah
if you don't mind, and say like when I say your job is to deliver shareholder value,
yeah
that is more of a descriptive statement
of
than
course
you
yeah
might
yeah
think.
hmm
Yeah, like I try to make it clear that like if you like you can have your own motivations that have nothing to do with being good at your job, and that's totally fine. And you can trade off being good at your job along any number of axes, and that's totally fine. When I say your job is about producing shareholder value, all I mean by that is like you will be rewarded to the extent you do it, and you'll be punished to the extent you don't do it. It's just a purely descriptive claim about consequences. That's all.
yes, and I think I understand. Yeah, like I don't I think that's why your writing is very interesting, is I think it is very descriptive. um but I guess what I mean to say is like if that is a descriptive statement, like I think we can agree that sometimes, and I'm not like so nihilistic or anti-tech to say that it never happens, that like increasing shareholder value and delivering some value or delivering a good product to users is a thing that occurs. But it's also the case that it is misaligned and that tech companies behave in all sorts of ways that are bad for their consumers and maybe bad for society. And there's all sorts of writing that I think is critical of tech. And in my view, like my position is not, burn all these tech companies to the ground, like arrest all these big tech CEOs. My position is simply that that sort of criticism is valid and is useful to not, again, even as a descriptive project, understanding how these tech companies operate. And so, but what I think I want to understand in this idea of shareholder primacy, because this is a big thing that I was really fixated on in my response, is that like I have values, and I think that the individuals who operate in a company have values. And in a company that is run through shareholder primacy, what we're saying is that those values don't matter, and that the only value is making as much money as possible. And it seems to me that like that can be demoralizing if your values are misaligned with your company's values and your company is doing something that is contrary to those. And I think value, I don't want to just, not just ethically, not just politically, like that's not really what I want to talk about. I want to talk more about the thing that you write about, which is good software, delivering good software to users. And it seems to me that the way I would put it is, I think that the reason sort of people maybe their writing sort of rubs them the wrong way is that like, it seems to me that your position is that if there's a conflict between delivering value to users and doing good engineering work, that your job as an engineer is to compromise giving values to users in order, a conflict between shareholder value and some other values, whether it's good software or providing a good experience to users, or again, broadly speaking, like helping society in some way, even in a minimal way, like providing a good source control product, right? Is that if there is that conflict, that your job as an engineer is to say, look, maybe you have some personal values. Your job is simply to operate within a hierarchical organization, do what you're told in order to make the executives happy. Is that, and I guess like maybe like, let me put it this way. I know I'm kind of jumbled here, but like I understand that that's like a descriptive statement, right? And that like, I mean, that's probably how I operate. Like, I don't go there in my work and say like, oh, we're gonna do everything different. Like, I understand that like you make compromises. Maybe like you don't agree with certain decisions that the executive team makes, or your manager makes. You say, okay, yeah, I'll sort of go along with that. Within limit, if there's some egregious ethical violation, which I didn't encounter in my work. But the idea is sort of like, do engineers not have a responsibility to uphold some sort of value if the company is degrading those values in favor? Yeah.
So I think what this is getting at is this idea of like, is it the engineer's role to be kind of permanently fighting this rearguard battle against the company in favor of quality? This is kind of the I don't know if you've watched Scrubs as a child of the 90s. It was very formative for me. The Dr. Cox figure from Scrubs, who's always in conflict with the hospital administration because he's pushing for patient care and they're pushing to make money. It's kind of that image, and yeah, and it's interesting because if there's one thing I'm writing my blog against, it is that image of like the engineer as, the person planting their feet and saying, no, I won't let you compromise the user experience. You're going to have to go through me to do this. I think that's self-indulgent and silly, and I don't like it for a whole lot of reasons. But the the main reason I don't like it is because I just don't think engineers are in a position to know. I don't think they're in a position to make those trade-offs in most of the cases. Obviously, in you know egregious ethical cases, yes, of course. But for like add one more ad to the search page, like I don't think like what is the point of an engineer pushing back against that? I'm, I'm struggling to kind of articulate myself super clearly here.
No, this is very interesting
Um,
because I think it's the sort of root of maybe where a
yeah,
disagreement is. Yeah.
I think I've gotten to the to to the core. I think okay, let's say companies have, let's say, like four goals, to maintain their monopoly, to make money, etc., to deliver good software to users, to make users happy, something like that. Um, and in some companies, those goals are super aligned, or maybe only ideal, maybe only like hypothetical ideal companies in your view. I don't know. And in many companies, those goals are super divergent in that they, might be making money fully at the expense of one of the other goals, like user happiness. Sure. The question is, as an individual software engineer, do you know if those goals are aligned or not? Like how much visibility do you have into whether those goals are divergent, such that you could say, "Hey, I'm not going to let you compromise user experience in favor of making money." Like, and I just don't think engineers are usually in a position to do that because they don't know key information about the health of the company. I I'm thinking of cases where, like, suppose you work for, I don't know, Cursor, in a world where Cursor was giving unlimited LLM access to users for $20 a month. And eventually Cursor management is like, actually, hold on, like we can no longer continue to run at such a loss, right? Every user is costing us $1,000 a month because they're using so much more inference than the $20 they pay us, right? And some Cursor engineer stands up and says, like, no, I won't let you inshitify the product. I will not do this. You're going to have to fire me in order to like charge users more money for this product. Like, what are they doing? Like, are they helping anybody? Are they like
Well, I guess maybe
it's good.
I wouldn't.
A
It's
company will just
yeah.
go through you like a knife through hot butter if you're blocking something that it really cares about. You're not making an impact. You're not making things better. You don't even know if you're on the right side. It's just deeply confusing to me.
So I think there's some interesting. I think there's two aspects to this. One is you said you're not making an impact, and the second is you don't know whether you're on the right side. Um,
Mm.
and I think I broadly speaking agree with this idea of impact, right? Like I don't think that sort of this idea of this like one individual standing up to stop like enshittification or whatever, and putting their career on the line in order to prevent ads from getting whatever, right? Like that's not really what I'm interested in. I think what I'm interested in is being critical. And I think being critical both internally and also externally about the alignment or misalignment of a company. And I think like I want to talk. I want to give an example that I wrote in my blog, which is about I'm very critical of this idea of shareholder primacy, and I write this about Boeing, and so Boeing's idea originally, maybe, I mean, sort of to simplify, was that we're a company that makes airplanes. We make money making airplanes, and we're going to. That's how we, that's the purpose of Boeing. And at some point, management, the Jack Welch School of Management, to my understanding here, which is that's not the purpose of the company. The purpose of the company is to make as much money as possible. And as a result, it doesn't matter if we make airplanes, it doesn't matter if we make widgets, it doesn't matter if we speculate on stocks. Who cares? All that we matter is that the company makes money, and that process eats away at the company. And I contrast this with Airbus. Like Airbus is basically a nationalized company. Like in Europe, it exists to make airplanes. Like no one, if you were the CEO of Airbus and you said, my goal is to make as much money as possible, and I don't care about airplanes, the French government, the German government, like it's not going to work, right? Descriptively, that's just not how it functions. And so but this is what's interesting to me, right? Is as a result, Airbus stock goes like this, Boeing their stock goes like this, because they have eaten away at the capacity for the company to actually produce value. And it seems to me that, and this is where I'm interested in this, like, I think a lot of founders write about this. The difference between like a founder-led and a management-led company is that like a founder has a very clear vision of like why their product exists and can make decisions, sort of executive decisions about that product. Whereas a management-led company maybe loses sight of that and is cutting, it is sort of doesn't really understand why their product exists, and as a result, maybe degrades it in a way because all they can see is balance sheets. They lack this sort of something immaterial, which is like a vision. And it seems to me that at least in places that I work, that I've worked, right, there's a cadre of engineers, and not only engineers, but sort of within a company, there are individuals who understand why the company exists and advocate for why that company exists. And so they say, yes, like Boeing is an engineering company that is that's the purpose. And we as software engineer or as mechanical, aerospace engineers, our goal is to like do the best work that we can in order to do that purpose. And probably some management chain like agrees with that. That loses out and gets replaced by people who don't have that vision. And then it sort of eats away at the capacity for the company to do the thing that was supposed to be. And I think that what people, at least like what I see, I think that software engineers think like that. They think sort of like founders in a way where it's like, I worked on Instagram, I helped build this great thing, and I'm so happy on it. And the original founder is so happy about it. Then we get sold to Facebook. Facebook does all this stuff and they degrade it. But like, I'm holding on to like the thing that made Instagram, the soul of Instagram. And again, it's not a sense of like engineers against management. It's a sense of maybe like a culture of an organization shifting over time as it maybe becomes mature, maybe gets bought out by a company, maybe it goes public, and that degrades. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Look, yeah, that makes sense, and you're absolutely right about that. I mean, the process of small companies becoming larger is one I'm very interested in, and at GitHub and previously at Zendesk, I was in a smallish company becoming larger and appealing more to the enterprise market, and the cultural changes that forces internally are like fascinating. And I think broadly in line with what you're saying, the only place I'd push back a little is I think it's certainly true that there's a cadre of engineers at all these companies who believe they're holding on to the soul of the company, and that they're the keepers of the kind of idea of what like the product is for and what it ought to do and the users that it's appealing to. I just don't know if they're correct about that. In my experience, when you talk to engineers like that, they don't really all tend to agree with each other, which suggests that perhaps what they're holding on to is not quite this soul of the company. It's certainly true that like the archetype of like an engineer with really outsized ownership and really outsized like product thinking tends to fade away as companies become larger. That's certainly true. But I'm skeptical of the idea that like I don't think you should try to be one of those engineers. I think that's what I mean.
Why not?
I don't think you should try to do it. Let me step back a bit.
Sure.
If you're a staff engineer, if you're a very senior engineer, if you have a lot of experience in the industry, you can do whatever you want. You can play in the sandbox however you want. I have no concrete advice. I mean, I have advice to give you, but I
could probably use
nothing
frankly,
to criticize you for.
Sure.
You can make whatever decisions you like. I don't really care, right? Like you're a grown up, you can make your own decisions. What I care about are people who are newer to the industry. This is kind of why I feel like emotionally invested in this stuff. It's not because I think like, staff engineers are making the wrong decisions or are being kind of annoying or like inefficient. I don't care. You do what you want. You're an adult. It's the people who are coming into the industry who are newer, who maybe got kind of acculturated in like 2019, 2018, 2020, and are kind of coming into the industry with this vision of what a software engineer ought to be. And don't realize or haven't internalized that the software engineering world changed drastically in like 2023-ish. Like it changed hard. And people who don't have the experience, I think, to recognize that, nothing wrong with them. They're just like more junior. I hate to see people in that position being told, oh, you should be idealistic. You should be the keeper of the company's soul. You should really plant your feet. You're an engineer. That's a sacred duty. You should stand up and you should take a stand in favor of good software. People are told that, they learn that, they believe it, and they go straight into the wood chipper, and they get laid off. They get pipped, they get penalized, and they have no idea what's happening because their experienced mentors who are quite successful in the industry have told them that this is what being an engineer is, and that makes me sick to see that happen. And I've seen it happen firsthand and secondhand in a whole bunch of different cases. And if there's one thing I'm like writing my blog for, it's to talk to those people and say, please listen to me, please don't like jump up on the picket line, like you will get shot. Like,
No, I mean, I
they
think
will just shoot you.
I think that's very interesting. And again, like I there's like a 70% where I think I agree with what you're saying, right? And I think that, like, to be frank, especially younger in my career and probably to this day, like I am that kind of person, right? And I think it can be difficult to navigate an organization like that. But I think that, and like, so like I agree, it's even a personal fault, I would say, right? Like, and I acknowledge that you're correct, that that's a personal fault, right?
So's the other direction.
Sure. It's like I acknowledge that, but I think what is yeah, like I don't want junior engineers to have a incorrect view of how the industry is, right? Like that it can be very ruthless and that the labor market is very competitive right now, right? I think what I maybe do want to have is a critical sense that that's like bad, that there's sort of a way in which the tech industry has degraded in the last few years. It's not just that, like, you need to be clear-eyed and you need to understand you don't have as much power if you're doing an interview. Like you have less power with an organization. Organizations are much more focused on cutting costs. Like, you need to understand that those things are true, but you also need to maintain, like, I think, a critical lens to that and say, like, there's something concerning about that for the world and for tech employees, and that you should have you should sort of, I don't know, your behavior is a different thing. Like, I'm not saying like stand up and be this revolutionary, but that at least like you should acknowledge that. And I think that, I don't think I see that. Maybe I don't know what your perspective is, but like I don't think I see that in your writing, and I think that people maybe are like crave that in a way that if you were to say, like, look, like, it's a dog eat dog world, the tech company is going to screw you over, and just you got to do whatever you want in order to survive because they're like terrible companies and whatever, right? Like, or that's just like how this horrible, as you say, this sort of, we live in this like capitalist hellscape. Like, like everything is totally screwed. Just get your bag, go home, like enjoy your life. People would react differently than how you write, and I wonder, like, what it is that you think causes that emotional reaction, and if people misunderstand your point or you're saying something slightly different.
It's easy to be pessimistic, right? Like I said at the start that this late capitalist hellscape view I don't think is like wrong on the facts, or it's certainly not like plainly wrong on the facts. I think it's more of like a internal mindset that, like, the people I work with, whatever the state of the world, whatever the state of the company, the people I work with, all the way up to like the VP level or the C staff level, are, like, broadly speaking, good people who want to do the right thing. And they're embedded in a system that makes it hard to do the right thing. That's fine. But it's also like a system that makes it possible to do things at massive scale, and which makes it possible to do good things at massive scale. Like, my first week at GitHub, like, I love gists. I love GitHub gists. They're an underappreciated feature, but I love them. I fixed the problem in gists where, like, comments weren't paginated. So any popular gist, when it got over like 400 comments, it would just stop loading for everybody. It would time out because it was loading all those comments on the same page. Yeah, I fixed that, and now people can use those gists, and I love that, and I feel really good about that. And I think, like, you can sort of focus on the negative side of things, which definitely exists, and there's a lot of people saying that, but there's not a lot of people, I think, articulating the position that you can accept the facts on the ground and still choose to be positive about it, and focus on the fact that people are trying to do the right thing. And I'm probably expressing it in my blog inexpertly. I'm sure I am, but I think it's a perspective that deserves to be expressed. That you can accept that we live in a late capitalist hellscape or whatever, and still think that you're like doing you're producing software that people use. You're producing like products that make people's lives easier. Like, you know, for all the other bad effects that you're doing, you're engaged in a process of trying to build products that people want to use. And I think that is true. Whatever else is true. Like, not all engineers are all engaged in shitification all the time.
So I think that your example sort of maybe it seems to me that when you describe this sort of anecdote, it's like I believe in advocating on behalf of the users, and so I'm going to fix this thing that degrades the product. That's not improving shareholder value, right? That's like I believed in this product, I did something that fixed it, and I felt really good about it. And it seems to me almost that in a lot of your writing, you're advocating against that. You're saying that users should not try and do that. They should try and manage upwards. They should try and uh, yeah, they should manage upwards. They should improve shareholder value. They should think about how their actions affect the bottom line. You understand? Is that not in
At
contradiction?
the
Maybe.
time, at the time, my team had an explicit mandate to make gists better. This is one of the directions we chose to do it, and we were rewarded for it from a management perspective. This was definitely not somewhere where I went off on my own and did this and did this thing. So certainly my own perspective doesn't match that.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, no, that's really interesting. That's because
but
it seems to me that you're
yeah,
describing things are aligned. You're not describing the company is just caring about shareholder value. It's that they care about the product as part of a strategy which benefits shareholder value.
but
Yeah,
yeah, the
yeah.
all things being equal, a better product will have more value to shareholders. Of course, all
Not
things being
always,
equal.
not always,
Um,
right? Yeah, but
the other thing is like if you're coming into a big company, right? And I think a lot of engineers will empathize with this. If you're coming in to say, well, let's pick a company I've never worked at, Amazon, and you have like strong opinions about things that could be made better in like the Amazon product, right? Yeah, Twitch. Um,
yeah.
I forgot for a second.
No, no.
Like there are two ways you could approach that. You could approach that and you could say, my job is to make these things better, and I'm going to advocate fearlessly to my manager that we should be able to make these things better, and I'm going to yell and scream and kind of drum up support and be this kind of like rebel leader inside the company in favor of like I don't know making the Amazon Kindle web page load twice as fast or whatever particular thing kind of annoyed you as a user. Or you can say, I'm going to play the game. I'm going to align myself with the Amazon kind of like with what they want to do. And then I'm going to use the political capital I get from doing that to spend 20% of my time pushing for these things that I do actually want, right? And I think that second approach is so much more effective
No, I,
than
I
the first
agree. Yeah,
approach.
yeah.
And I really do feel for the engineer that like wants to fix these kind of like things that have bothered them personally. I just, I think the way to go about that is not to try and like turn the ship in that direction. It's to kind of do it yourself in with the credit you've built up by following the ship in the direction it's going.
So I think I agree, and hopefully this is like a good point that we could conclude on. Um, is I think that a lot of your writing reads as cynical to people because that sense of value is not there. And I think that a lot of what you write is just it's about navigating company politics. It's about navigating organizational dynamics. But the question that people are lost is like, what is the goal here? And is the goal like, no, like I understand I can't just like willy-nilly just make good things happen in an organization. I care about the product. I have this like shareholder capitalist mindset where I care about the product, I care about making money, I care about the health of my relationship with my employees, I care about all these things, and I want to like do good by all of these people. Or is and so, but the organization is maybe a little bit hostile to that because of all these external pressures, and so I need to find some way to compromise. That's my position for what it's worth. Like that's how I try to operate within work. Or is it sort of like that you have to do this in order for personal advancement, like in order to win, in order to get more money, in order to get more power in the organization? That's why you do this, or even just in order to survive and not get laid off. Like you have to do all these things that you don't have. And I think you reference a little bit in your work, but I think it's ultimately maybe why people find it somewhat cynical is it's not clear. Uh, yeah, it is. I guess my question is like what do you view the sort of goal here, in terms of like, is that
Yeah.
the goal? Is the goal to make the product better, to do right by all these stakeholders? Is the goal some sort of personal career advancement, or maybe all of the above, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like you have a day stretching out ahead of you, hypothetically. You can drive to the grocery store and you can do your groceries. You could drive to the doctor and get a doctor's appointment. You can drive to a park and go for a hike. You can drive to downtown and start yelling at homeless people and kicking them. You can do whatever you want with your day. But in order to do any of those things, you have to drive the car. You have to know how to drive the car. My blog is, I think, teaching people how to drive the car. and
Okay.
and it's sort of up to them, like, you know, if what you care about is like promotion and money, then yeah, I'm telling you how to do that. If what you care about is carving out enough capital that you can spend down on building side projects, then yeah, I'm telling you how to build that capital. If what you care
Mm,
about is trying to change company policies and culture, then yeah, I'm telling you how to get to a position where you will be heard and hopefully be able to do that. I'm kind of agnostic in most of my posts on like what your end goal ought to be. I mean, if you know, if you have a ton of dependence, right? Like maybe you ought to just be optimizing for money and power, right? Like I don't really know who I'm giving this advice to. I just I think there's an underserved niche in like tech writing that just tells you how to drive the car. There's lots of people telling you where you ought to drive to and what you ought to do when you get there.
I think that's interesting because I think, at least in my writing, I mix this. Like, what I try to do is I try to tell a story about how the tech industry operates that is mixed with a critical idea of how they're run and how society operates and how capital operates. And that I'm a person who operates within this system that has the ability to be critical about it and to respond accurately. And you know, you wrote this. Well, I want to focus on one thing you said, which is, I guess, like, what is your goal, in terms of operating in a tech company? What is your purpose in, you know, being a staff engineer, operating well, within these companies?
I mean, a large part of that is quite personal, and I sort of decline to answer
Sure, I mean that's
why
fine.
I particularly might be in need of money. I mean, it has to do with a whole bunch of things in my personal life that I'm not particularly willing to talk
No,
about.
no, I mean
But I'd say
no
it's
worries,
like
of course.
yeah, it's like 50% that, and it's 50% that I like being able to do things.
Hmm.
I like being able to make things happen. And typically that's like little fixes here and there and stuff. I like doing that. Um, I don't know. I also just like, I think I just like the work. I just like steering, like being involved in steering large organizations. I find that really engaging. I find that really fun. I kind of like it in itself. And I have other goals that I drive it to, but you know, if I had some other way to achieve those goals, I would still miss it. I would still miss making like large, imperfect, messy organizations work.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good place to conclude on, and I think it maybe is the source of difference, and that I think there's certainly elements of that which I appreciate, and maybe with which your readers appreciate. But broadly speaking, it's I kind of view myself as like a terminal L6. Like I'm not really interested in this sort of large organizational questions. I'm interested in coding. I'm interested in engineering. I like delivering good software, and and so maybe your blog isn't for me. It's maybe I should read someone else.
Well, maybe. I certainly won't force anybody to read my blog.
No, but I like it. I always find it very interesting. And yeah, I hope this was productive. I thought I got a very good understanding of your position, and so yeah, thank you for talking to me.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me on. I think we definitely got to a couple of the key points of disagreement.